Welcome to the Scalable Marketing Machine Podcast, where serious founders like you learn how to stop guessing and start growing with marketing that actually moves the needle. I'm your host, Victoria Hajar, fractional CMO, strategist, and founder of Ugly Ventures, where we provide growing businesses with the marketing leadership they need or help up-level the team they already have. Every week, we'll break down real-world strategies for building marketing operations that scale, leading high-performing teams, and aligning your brand and growth plan with your business goals. Because marketing should fuel your business, not frustrate it. Let's get into it. If you think strategy is just a checklist or a polished plan, you have to hear this episode. We sat down with Karim Gonzalez, a war studies expert, university professor, and one of the sharpest strategic minds I think I've ever met. And we talked about what strategy really means in business and why so many founders get it wrong. Karim takes us back to the roots of strategy, from ancient battlefields to modern boardrooms, and shared why true strategy is rooted in paradox, not just planning. We unpack the difference between when you need a plan and when you need a strategy, plus 4 game-changing principles that every marketing-minded founder should know. This one's full of golden takeaways, so bring a pen and paper. We talk about the power of surprise, the Red Queen effect, and why success can sometimes be the biggest trap of all. So if you're ready to play the long game and play to win, this conversation will change the way you think. Let's dive in.
I'm really happy to introduce Karim Gonzalez, who is my brother, and I'm really proud of. And Karim is joining us this session because he will be teaching us really interesting stuff about strategic from the point of view of his war studies and his passion for war and strategy. So Karim holds a BA in history from the University of Maryland and an MA in war studies from King's College London. He has been a professor at Anáhuac University in Mexico City since 2017, where he has taught courses in strategic intelligence, public administration, and the humanities. Karim has published academic articles for various academic journals and participated as an expert guest on popular radio shows. Karim served as an external researcher for the Mexican Navy's Institute for Strategic Research, where he collaborated on war game projects and published on topics of military strategy, geopolitics, defense, and national security. He has also published articles for books by the Mexican Institute for Strategic Studies in National Security and Defense of the Mexican Army, and he was also secretary of the Mexican Association of Historical and Military Studies, where he was in charge of the association's historical outreach and dissemination projects. He's a fan of war and strategy board games, and his greatest passion is traveling the world to visit and explore battlefields from all eras. So, with further ado, Karim, you can get started. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys. Can you guys hear me? All well?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Well, good day, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is I always like to come give these talks about strategy, and it's kind of funny because I get requested to speak about strategy more by businesses and corporations than I do by by armies or the military or think tanks or academia. So it's definitely something that I did not intend to when I was studying all this, but yeah, I mean, I can see why there would be interest in strategy from the corporate world and the entrepreneurial world. And I'm not a business marketer or anything. I'm a military strategist, but I definitely see the parallels, and it's something that I've tried to make work, and I'm going to share some ideas with you that I think could be valuable, because I hear this whole word, like the word strategy. I think it has become extremely overused, and sometimes it's just not done in the proper way, right? So I want to give you some insights into what strategy really is, and then with you guys' collaboration, probably be able to figure out how exactly this could apply to you guys' business, how you guys can do your your strategy, if you even need a strategy, how you guys can be better at that for you and your businesses and your endeavors, right? And the reason why it's relevant, because sometimes like there's not a whole connection between, well, this guy, he does history and studies war and defense and military strategy, like why is he talking to us about, like we're entrepreneurs, we have businesses, we're founders, right? Like what does one thing have to do with anything? So that's but that's really where the connection comes from, because strategy, if you really study the history of strategy, the ideas and the concepts that sometimes are applied in the corporate world when it comes to strategy, the original ideas and concepts come from the context of war and the military. The oldest treatises that we have, the oldest ideas and concepts and treatises that we have on strategy come from the military and military conflicts, right? You probably heard of The Art of War. That's a text from like 400 before Christ that was born in China, right? That's the one that Sun Tzu began laying down the foundation for some like these strategic ideas and concepts. And then in the Greek and Roman worlds, you also have there's even the word of strategos, right? Like the strategos in ancient Greece was the commander of the army, the one that had to administer the army, make the decisions, make plans for campaigns and battles. And his name was strategos, right? So literally strategy. And in the Middle Ages, it was kind of a similar idea. So the history of strategy really lies in the heart of war and military thinking. So it's this whole idea that strategy can also be applied to business is probably from the 1950s, 1960s onwards, maybe. Like it's not that long since the whole concept of strategy began to be used in like a business or corporate context, right? That was not a thing before the 20th century. So that's why the connection happens these days, when strategy seems to be something that many companies and businesses all of a sudden became interested in, right? But if you really want to understand where it comes from, where did it originate, and where are the foundations of strategy, then usually military history is going to have the answer to that, right? So that's a little bit of what I wanted to just to give you guys that kind of background and for you to know how we got here. And then let me walk you through a few things about so my goal with this chat is to help you guys understand what strategy actually is, right? Like what exactly do we mean when we talk about strategy? And then I came up with 3 or 4 principles of strategy. There's many of them, but I came up with like 3 or 4 that I think could be the most useful to a corporate business environment, entrepreneur environment. And yeah, I came up with some examples. They're probably not the best examples because, like I said, I'm not a marketer or anything like that. But you guys could probably chip in as well. And if you when I explain the ideas and concepts, maybe you guys can even come up with some of the examples where this applies or doesn't apply in your own particular industry, right? So hopefully we'll be able to have these two worlds meet, and you'll get value to this, because like I said, every time I've spoken to people about strategy within the corporate context, it's just a terrible misunderstanding, a terrible misunderstanding of what it is, and sometimes that could lead to just inefficient execution of what they would call strategy, right? So yeah, let me get into it. And the first thing I like to do is let me ask you guys a question. Let's see how your strategic thinking is these days. There we go. So what you see here is the classic conundrum of the logic of strategy, and the concept of the logic of strategy is to really understand how does strategy work, not how we do it, but what is it, right? So that's why we have to start with talking about the logic of strategy. So let me give you guys a question, and I guess you can just unmute yourselves and give me your best answer. So what you see here, let me paint this scenario in your mind. So what you see right here on the left, this is a column of modern tanks, right? I don't know exactly where this photo is from, but this is usually how in the modern world, this is how tanks would usually drive towards a particular target, a particular mission or operation. This is a tank column, right? Now, imagine for a second, you guys are the commanders of these tank battalion. You guys are at the very front. Let's say this is the front tank, right? You guys are the commanders. Wherever you go, the whole column behind you is going to follow, right? And then you come to this path where it splits up into 2, and you come to this crossroad where now you have 2 paths that you can take, right? And now you're wondering, should we go left or should we go right? Now, remember, if you are driving a tank column, right, this is probably because you're at war, you're driving towards, you're trying to get to a particular strategic point, an operation, maybe you're driving into battle, who knows, right? But you're in the context of a conflict, of a war. So now, the path on the right, as you can see here in the image, it's well lit. It's paved, just like the one that you see here, right? Like it's paved, it's well lit, it's proper. There's the signs all across the road. There's supply lines across the path, right? So it's like a very, very convenient path towards your objective, right? Both of these paths will get you to the same place, but through different paths, right? And then the path on the left is a much rougher path. It's not even paved. There's no signs. There's no logistical supplies. There's no delineation of exactly where the path goes, even though it will lead you the same direction, right? So this sounds like a much more inconvenient path to take to the destination, right? So you as the leader, you're at the head of the tank column, and you have to decide which of the two paths take. Both of them are going to take you to the same goal, or the same destination, but through very different paths. Which one would you guys choose, and why?
Hi, this is Allison.
Allison, go ahead.
I'm seeing that the paved path, as you said, ideally looks very clear and smooth, but I also see stoplights, so that could potentially cause some like breaking up of the unit, right? If they have to obey like traffic laws. Also,
well, in this context, let's say you don't have to pay attention to that, because if you're
Okay.
at war, you're probably not gonna, you don't need to follow the traffic lights, right?
Sure.
So maybe we could ignore the traffic lights and the speed limits and all that.
So thinking about how something is smooth, but then you also have more of like, I'm thinking a more defined, rigid path that you psychologically might have to follow. Whereas with the unpaved road, there feels like a little bit more leeway, like more of a suggestion of a path, but maybe you can go off-roading a bit more, especially if you're in a tank. I imagine it can hold up to different types of environments. You also think about in a structured way, the paved path might be more ideal because you have more of that assurance that you're not going to run into, any ravines or perhaps upset any, nature, right? Honestly, I think I feel like it's might be a trick question, because it does seem like the paved path should be, the easier route, but I think there's some things to be considered about, that road less traveled idea.
Okay, so what would you choose?
I think you did mention that both paths leave you to the same destination, but I would want to know
get you to the destination.
But I would want to know which one is the shortest.
Okay, so you'll be optimizing for the shortest path. Okay. Got it.
Because
let's say the one on the right is the shortest path and the one on the left is the longest.
Well, if the paved path is the shortest, then that does seem like the more logical position to take.
Got it. Okay. I like it. Any other suggestions? Any other logic or rationale behind the decision?
Hi, Deborah. Welcome to our session. Do you want to participate in this question?
Oh, yeah. Hello. Nice to meet you. Yeah. So
Hello.
there is two paths. One is it's the same destination. Is that right? I understand correctly?
Yeah.
And you asked us which one we want to take between the one that look amazing and without having obstacle, and the other one that look a disaster with a lot of obstacle. It's that right? The answer seems simple. Like we want all the simple thing, but we want also to learn things. So I will choose the left one, the right one. I mean,
the paved one, the one on the right.
Yes, because it looks simple, and even if we learn while we have hard time, but I think the goal is for everyone to build a simple road for everyone.
Got it. Okay, love it. So we chose, from you two guys who participated, you chose the right path, the one on the right. It seems much more convenient. It is shorter. It is much more, it's well lit. It's supplied. It sounds like a great idea. And guess what? Because you chose this path, your entire tank column is about to get demolished and destroyed by the enemy. Because the fact that this path is the convenient one, what do you think that tells?
That's what your adversary would expect you to do.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It makes you predictable. So this is why introducing the logic of strategy, because strategy, the reason why it's so complicated, and many people don't think of strategy this way, because that's exactly why I'm trying to teach you guys this. Strategy is actually extremely complicated to navigate because the nature of strategy is paradoxical. Everything is paradoxical in strategy. And I'm going to give you a bunch of examples to make that clear. But you cannot think of strategy if you're not thinking in paradoxes. And obviously paradoxes are very confusing. In this case, let me give you the first paradox. The worst path becomes the best path precisely because it's the worst path. Let me say that again. The worst path, the one on the left, becomes the better path precisely because it's bad, right? And because it's bad, then nobody's going to expect you to take that path because it's the bad path, right? It's not paved, it's longer, there's obstacles, not signalized. They're like, surely no one's going to take that path. They're going to take the more convenient path. So guess what? If we want to ambush them, if we want to attack them, which of the two paths are we going to be waiting for them? On the right one. You just got yourself killed, right? So this is the logic of strategy. The good path becomes bad precisely because it is good. That is the paradox of strategy. That's how strategy works, right? This is not how most people think of strategy or even do strategy. And that's why I think this is so important to acknowledge, right? So let me explain to you let me show you an example. This is when we talk about the logic of strategy, think of it in two ways. There's two options. You have linear logic and paradoxical logic. Strategy works in paradox. Planning works in linear logic, right? So let me give you an example. If we're talking about linear logic, A leads to B. So it's like the obvious, it's common sense kind of stuff. For example, in a company, if we invest in training, we'll be more effective. Sure, more training, A, leads to more effectiveness, B. That's it, right? Linear logic, nothing to worry about. But that's not how strategy works. Strategy is paradoxical, where A actually becomes B. So for example, in war, we always talk about if you want peace, you must prepare for war. That sounds so counterintuitive, but that's exactly right. And then look at it the other way. If we become pacifists, we will invite war. And in your mind, you'll be like, how is that possible? If I am vouching for peace, how am I going to invite war? Well, because usually, let's say, if you're a pacifist country, one thing you will notice from pacifist countries, let's say Costa Rica, for example. Costa Rica is one of the few countries in the world that have declared themselves so pacifist that they don't even have an army. They don't have an armed force, right? So why does that invite war? Because who's more likely to be attacked? The strong one or the weak one? Well, of course, the weak one, right? So by you trying to be a pacifist and therefore not having any armed forces, you're inviting to be attacked. When you have an extremely strong military, then no one wants to mess with you. So you actually, by becoming more warlike, you increase your chances for peace. Completely counterintuitive. That's how strategy works. But if you, now that you understand this, you probably think, well, this is not how we think of strategy. Because I'm guessing that when you guys think sometimes of like, hey, I'm going to do my business strategy or my marketing strategy or my, my financial strategy, you're mostly thinking in linear logic. A leads to B. We invest more in ads and get more leads, right? We invest in more training, we hire more people, we get more output. Linear logic. That's not strategy. That's planning for sure, but that's not strategy. Okay. So let me give you. Let me show you why that's important to really understand in this context, right? So let me give you a few examples. So let's say the linear logic of strategy. This is where A leads to B. Okay. So for example, let's say you want to launch a new product in your company or in your business. Great. You want to launch a new product. You're probably going to have to come up with a plan for launching your new product, right? Advertising, make sure that you can fulfill it, customer support, the finances, how you're going to charge for this product. Like you have to prepare all these things, right? Will there be obstacles along the way? Sure. But that's why you have a plan. And your plan for launching your new products is probably going to be like, a 5-step plan. First, we're going to do this, then this, and that. And boom, our product is launched. Great. you can do that. You can just follow the linear logic of strategy. If I do these 5 steps, my product gets launched and we're good, right? Look at this, a marketing, I think there's like a marketing dashboard, right? Like if you guys run ads, I know you probably run ads, right? So it's the same thing. You can easily track the input and then you can predict the output. If I just put more money into this ad, I should see a return on the leads, on the investment, right? Same thing. It's like a simple plan. I input A, I get B, and that's it, right? Let's say you're studying for an exam or a qualification, or you're trying to improve your skills for, for your coaching services or whatever. Well, if I just study more, I will become a better coach, a better leader, whatever it is, right? A leads to B. Simple. This is linear logic. This is how most people operate, but that is not strategy, right? Paradoxical. What makes strategy really, this is what strategy actually is, right? Chess. In chess, if you guys know how to play chess, if you played chess before, you know that you cannot do a linear thinking. You cannot just be like, well, I'm just going to move my pawn here and my rook here and my knight here, and that's it. You can't do that. Why not? Because you're facing an opponent who also gets to move. Here, nobody else is moving. It's a one-player game. It's just you launching your product. It's just you doing your marketing campaign. It's just you studying for your certification. Here, you have somebody else that is responding and interacting with your actions. Chess, sports, right? Like baseball here. Like I cannot just be like, well, I'm just going to throw the ball and that's it. No, I have to take into account what the hitter is expecting, what he's prepared for, what the situation is. My strategy needs to take into account that my opponent also gets to move, right? In a battle, obviously, this is the Battle of Austerlitz from Napoleon, right? His most famous battle. You cannot just be like, okay, here's the plan for the battle. Let me just execute the plan. Like if you do that without taking into account that your opponent also gets to move and he's going to react and interact with whatever you do, it's a recipe for disaster, right? And then this is just like in business, right? Like if there's competition in business, which there is a lot of competition in business, you cannot just worry or think about your own business without thinking of other people's business and the industry and your competitors. That's what the difference between the paradoxical logic of strategy and just planning for something. You don't need a strategy to do a marketing campaign. You don't need a strategy to launch a new product. You don't need a strategy to prepare for your certification exam. You need a plan for sure, but not a strategy, because nobody's interacting with you here, right? You can just follow the steps and the thing will get executed. Here, I could follow the steps and it could very well not play out like that because my opponent also gets a vote. Does this make sense so far?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully I don't confuse you guys too much, but yeah. So that's the two logics of strategy that you need to be aware of, right? Now, how do we know if we need to just make a plan or if we actually need a strategy, right? And here's just like very simple guidelines that I guess I just share with you guys. So what are the conditions for me to know if I need a strategy, if I need to take into account other actors? Well, you have to ask yourself, am I in an environment that is active, reactive, and interactive? If the answer is yes, then you need a strategy, because that means you could be in a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game, for those of you might, you've probably heard of this phrase before. A zero-sum game is where whenever you win, the other people lose. There's only one winner, right? If I win, you lose. That's a zero-sum game, right? There's many zero-sum games. Obviously, war is a zero-sum game. For me to win the war, you need to lose the war, right? So there's only one winner. In business, there could be an example where there's a zero-sum game. Let's say you guys offer marketing services, and there is one company that needs a consultant, a marketing consultant, and they have 5 candidates. You are competing with all those 5 candidates, and that's a zero-sum game because there's only one is going to get hired. So that means whoever wins, everybody else has to lose. That's a zero-sum game. That's a scenario where you absolutely need a strategy. What's going to be my strategy for getting that contract? And the reason you need a strategy is because in that environment, this is active, reactive, and interactive. Whatever your offer is, The other 4 people that are also vying for the contract, they're probably going to take that into account and react to your offer and try to better your offer and try to make their offer or their pitch juicier, drop their prices, improve the benefits. There is this interactive game of you make your offer, they counter offer, and then you make a counter offer to the counter offer. That requires strategy. You need to keep in mind the other people playing the game with you, right? However, in business, what you realize is that in business, for the most part, you actually don't need strategy. You just need a plan. A plan is the opposite. It's when it's a passive environment, unreactive and inactive, right? In fact, if you really think about it, most businesses are not really in a competitive environment. They're mostly in a non-zero-sum game. They're in a cooperative environment, right? You're not trying to fight your clients. You're trying to cooperate with your clients. You're trying to find win-wins for your clients. Or let's say you make an alliance with another business, right? You provide a service, they provide a service, and you guys make an offer together. That's cooperation. Most businesses actually benefit more from cooperation than from competition. But if you're going to be cooperating with someone, you don't need a strategy. You just need a plan, right? And plan is usually when it's going to be passive, unreactive, and inactive. There's not going to be anybody responding to you, right? Let's take this again, for example. Let's say you're studying for your qualification. Who's going to oppose you from studying for your qualification? No one. No one's going to stop you, right? No one's going to adjust to you. The exam it's not like the exam is going to be like, oh, sounds like this girl knows everything. Let me make the exam a bit harder. No, the exam is not going to be reacting to you, right? So that's why you don't need a strategy. You don't need a study strategy. You just need a plan to prepare for the exam. And you can just follow the steps, and that's it. Nobody's reacting or interacting with you in that environment, right? So this is why it's really, really important to understand this distinction, because the risk, if you really think about it, the risk is not that you need a plan and you deploy a strategy. It's a little bit of overkill. It's unnecessary, but it's fine. The big risk is when you are in a strategic environment and you don't realize it and you only come up with a plan. That's what happens. This is when you lose. This is where you get destroyed, right? Because you needed a strategy, but you only came up with a plan. You didn't take into account the moves of the other people that you're going to be interacting with. That's why it's crucial to understand this. Okay, so this is kind of the theory, like the simplest way I can explain the theory of what strategy actually is, and how do you know when you need a strategy, or you just need to deploy a simple plan that is just a series of steps that you can just follow, and nobody, for the most part, is going to oppose you, resist you, or respond to you, right? You can just follow along with your plan, and that's it. Okay. Now, let me give you, I think I got four principles of, these are four, like I said, there's many principles in strategy. I picked 4 that I think could be some of the most, maybe relevant or applicable to the world of business and entrepreneurship and marketing and whatnot. So yeah, like I said, the examples that I brought might not be the best, but maybe you guys can even give me better examples. But hopefully the principles become clear so that you guys can see how this applies in your context, right? So the first principle of strategy is the achievement of surprise. It says the goal behind the paradoxical nature of strategy is to achieve surprise, to become unpredictable. We already saw that here, right? The reason we pick the rough road is because it's the unpredictable road. If we pick the predictable road, then we're putting ourselves in danger. We are becoming predictable. So the paradox of strategy, you need to become unpredictable to achieve surprise. That's one of the main principles of strategy. Become unpredictable, right? This is a famous example. I don't know if you guys have ever read about Hannibal. He used to be back in the 3rd century. He was probably the guy who brought the Roman Republic closest to complete destruction. Like Rome was never closest to being destroyed than it was by Hannibal. And he famously crossed the Alps, and he had all these elephants and what you see here on the left. And this is just an example for you to illustrate it, right? This map that you see here on the right, this was Hannibal's route that he was using to invade Italy, right? All the way from Spain, down the coast of Spain, and then into Italy. Now, if you follow this line, when we get to this part, right, this is the Pyrenees, the frontier between France and Spain today. This is the point when Hannibal decided to become unpredictable. The predictable thing to do at this point was to continue down the coast, just like he has been doing all across Spain. Just go by the coast, go by the coast. And the reason you want to follow the coast is because you can have your fleet, your naval fleet, following the army on land and keep supplying the army. So staying close to the coast is the greatest move, but it's also the predictable move. And guess what? You see this city that's called here Massila? The Romans fortified the hell out of that city because they were expecting that Hannibal was going to keep going through the coast, and they fortified this city to wait for him and stop him from entering Italy. But Hannibal was a genius, a military genius, and he understood strategy, and he was like, hey, they're expecting me to keep going through the coast, but instead of going through the coast, I'm going to do something that no one has ever done before. I'm going to take my army and I'm going to cross it across the Alps. And it was a tough call because he lost like half of his army, but he took the Romans by complete surprise when they were waiting for him on the coast. And all of a sudden, 50,000 men come out of the Alps in North Italy, and now Rome is being invaded. And he put Rome on their knees, basically, right? So he understood strategy. He did the unpredictable move. And the only reason he was able to do this is because he knew that his opponent also had a vote. Okay, so now how could we apply this to, this is the example that I thought of in the context of, let's say digital marketing in this case, right? Let's say you want to do a campaign, right? You're going to launch your product and you're probably going to do a marketing campaign, right? And you're going to use social media because, that's usually where a big part of your launches would happen, on social media. Now, let's say you're really trying to reach a wide audience, right? I'm guessing, based on what my limited knowledge on marketing, usually you might want to do a big launch on like Instagram, TikTok, use social media, maybe LinkedIn, right? Whichever platform it fits your demographic or your avatar, right? This is where you're going to want to mostly do your campaign, right? But now when your competitors who are watching what you're doing, right? They're probably gonna be thinking in the same common sense way that you're thinking. Oh, the best channel to launch my campaign is going to be Instagram or TikTok. Maybe TikTok, because I'm speaking to a younger demographic, right? And TikTok tends to have a lot of that audience, so that's the ideal platform for me to launch my campaign, right? My new product or my launch product campaign, right? Well, guess what? That makes you predictable. Oh, we know that they're going to launch their campaign on TikTok. So, that day we're going to drive more traffic to TikTok. We're going to compete with them so that the product launch is not as successful as they would hope, right? And that's exactly what would happen if you go the predictable path. But then maybe you chose, because that, now you can see one move ahead and be like, hey, instead of me launching on TikTok, maybe I'll do something on TikTok, but I'm actually going to focus a lot on YouTube. And my understanding is that YouTube is the hardest platform to grow, right? It's like longer term evergreen, but it's the hardest one to grow. Like YouTube is really, really hard to grow, right? So most people would not be expecting a launch to happen on YouTube because that's the hardest platform to get traction on. But that's exactly why it could work, because no one will be expecting you to do that. So there will be no resistance, no opposition. Nobody expected you to launch on YouTube instead of Instagram or TikTok, which was the obvious move that everybody saw coming from a mile away, right? You take them by surprise. Is there going to be a compromise? Sure. Hannibal lost half of his army crossing the Alps. Could you lose some leads by launching on YouTube instead of TikTok or Instagram? Sure. But this is where the strategic thinking really comes in. It's like, is the risk worth the reward? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but it's something that you have to take into account. Become unpredictable. Make sense so far? Do you guys have a better example of how you guys can become unpredictable in your field of work or in your companies or businesses?
No, it was clear. Thank you.
Or is there any? You guys think of an example? How can you guys become unpredictable in your businesses? Something that your competition would not expect.
By having like a marketing very original.
Okay, but I'm not sure if innovation is the same as unpredictable. Because something that is original, it could be something that is creative or original could be unpredictable. Maybe I could see that. Okay.
I was thinking about like this campaign that Oreo recently launched in Spain, where they were saying that they were going to close, and that the product was going to be like removed from all the stores and all that. But it was more like a campaign because they were going to announce like their new branding and whatever. And I think that that's something that completely moved to the audience, because everybody started getting nostalgic about losing like their favorite cookies and how they were going out to market. And I think that was a strategic move.
Yeah, that's a great example, because like if Oreo is saying that they're going to go out of business and they're going to close the company and shut everything down, then you can imagine that the competitors are like, all right, don't need to worry about it. They're out of business. We can just forget about them. Just let them be, right? Let them go away. And then that means that now when they come out with a new campaign, they face no resistance, no opposition, no competition, because no one was expecting that they were going to go from, hey, we're shutting down, to we actually rebranding ourselves, right? That's a brilliant move. That's a great strategic move, right? But they had to take into account how people were going to respond to that. That's paradoxical logic. That is strategic thinking, not linear thinking, right? That's a great example. Okay, let me show you guys the second, another principle of strategy. It's something called the reversal of success. And again, this is one of those counterintuitive, very confusing ideas of strategy. But if you really think it through, you'll understand how it works and why it's true, right? It says, in the paradoxical reality of strategy, success can turn into failure after exceeding the culminating point of success. In fact, strategy is so strange that sometimes the more successful you are, the more likely you are to fail. Let me say that one more time. The more successful you are, the more likely you are to fail. How can that be possible? Well, once again, the paradoxical logic of strategy, right? Just two historical examples here, and then so this is Napoleon on the left, and the invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi Germany in World War II, right? Operation Barbarossa. So these are like two of the most famous military catastrophes and disasters in military history, right? When Napoleon and Germany invaded Russia, and the winter basically defeated them, and they both lost. Napoleon lost like 90% of his army. Germany lost like half of their army, and both of them, that was the decline. That was the beginning of the decline of both Napoleon and Hitler in World War II, right? So how can this happen? How can this happen to two pretty, like, the greatest commander in history and the most competent military of World War II at that point, at least, right? How could this happen? Well, that's why strategy is so pervasive, right? The reason why this happened to both Napoleon and Hitler was because the more they got into Russia, the deeper they got into Russia, the closer they were getting to failure, right? What you see here of the map on the right, this is the invasion of the Soviet Union by Germany in World War II. Obviously, Russia is enormous. The biggest defense that Russia has is its size. It's gigantic, right? And so you start pushing into Russia and you start defeating the Russians, and you think everything is going great. And, oh, look at that. We're succeeding. Keep pushing towards Moscow. Keep pushing. And then you keep pushing and you keep succeeding. And in your mind, you're like, man, this is great. We're just mowing the Russians down. We just keep getting deeper and deeper into Russia, without realizing that the deeper you go into Russia, the more likely you are to fail, because now you have immensely long lines of supplies and communication that slowly are going to have your army break down. And that's exactly what happened to both Napoleon and Hitler. The reason they lost in Russia is because they got so deep into the territory, and their supply lines had become so overextended that they just couldn't supply their armies anymore, and they just basically stopped to a halt, and then they had no other choice but to retreat. The more they succeeding at penetrating Russia, the closer they were getting to that failure, right? So success can sometimes lead to failure if you don't plan ahead of time. This is why you need the strategy, right? So how can that happen in the context of business? I know this might not make it will make sense. I'm not saying like this is an ideal like advice for businesses, but it makes sense, right? So what I put here is customer satisfaction. Let's say you have a coaching program, right? You coach people on I don't know, like business growth, right? Like you teach them how to grow their businesses and make more revenue and increase their growth, right? Well, let's say you have a client and that client comes in, and then you teach them, you give them your coaching and your services, and you help them grow their business, right? And let's say their goal was to reach, 7 figures in a year. And then you help them get to 7 figures in a year, right? And then at the end of the year, you're like, hey man, congratulations, we got you to 7 figures. Excellent job. Now let's sign you up for another year of coaching, right? Let's continue the coaching. You want him to pay for another year of coaching. And now he's going to look at you and be like, well, I already got what I wanted. You got me to 7 figures, so I don't really need you anymore. Thank you. And now you lost a client, right? Because you were so successful at helping the client, now you lost a client. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing, right? Like, this is not a bad thing, because I mean, that's why you're business. That's why you're business, right? You're in business to help people achieve their goals. But if you want to keep having clients come back and have recurring customers coming back to you year after year, and they need to keep wanting your support, then you have to be careful about how successful they become. Because if they become so successful that they don't need you anymore, well, you lose a client, right? Maybe it's a good thing, right? I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It's a good thing. But understand that that is a reality of strategy, right? That is the paradoxical logic of strategy. You have to be aware of these things. You could be so successful that then your clients don't need you anymore, right? So how do you compute that into your calculations? Well, it's not about making them less successful, right? Because that's probably not like an ethical thing to do. But you have to think about, like, okay, what else can I offer them? Okay, maybe I help you with that goal. So there's nothing else I can do for you in that goal. But maybe I find a way to give you another goal that I can still help you with. But if you don't have that in your calculations because you didn't foresee this strategic interplay, then you lose a client instead of having foreseen this before ahead of time, and then understanding that success has a culminating point. And after it crosses that culminating point, it can turn to a failure if you don't find a way to pivot somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Great. Okay, let me go to the next one. This is something that's called the Red Queen effect. And this is from, you guys might remember the movie from Alice in Wonderland, where the Red Queen, the whole idea of the Red Queen effect is when you have to keep running as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. Strategy is exactly like that. It says, in the paradoxical reality of strategy, no strategy can remain effective indefinitely without adaptation, right? Many times when people are thinking about, when they're planning, when they're doing, they're looking for like a winning formula. It's like, hey man, if we just find the winning formula for this marketing campaign, for this product launch, for this service, whatever it is, if we just find like a winning formula, then we're good. We can just use that formula from now on, use that framework from now on, and our life is solved, right? That is linear logic. That is not strategy. That is not paradoxical logic, and it will come back and it will probably backfire on you, right? So let me give you an example. This is an example again from World War II. You guys probably recognize this fellow. That's Alan Turing. You guys might remember he's the guy who, he's the mathematician and code breaker that led the team of code breakers in World War II to decipher the Enigma code, the Enigma machine that the Germans were using to encrypt all their secret communications. Alan Turing is the guy who led the efforts at Bletchley Park in the UK to help the Allies break the Enigma code and be able to read all the messages from the German High Command, right? And then what you see here on the left, this is the Battle of the Atlantic. So if you remember in World War II, when the UK was left alone, basically Germany had taken all of Europe, and the UK was the only country that remained standing against Germany. The United States was responsible, or well, they were the main source of supply to the UK. The only reason the UK held strong during World War II was because of all the help and all the aid the United States was sending to the UK, and they were sending them across the Atlantic. And the reason it's called the Battle of the Atlantic is because Germany developed a massive fleet of submarines to sink all the help that the US was sending to the UK. Now, the reason this is important is because when Alan Turing and the code breakers at Bletchley Park managed to decipher the Enigma code, now they knew exactly where the German submarines would be positioned across the Atlantic, and now they could circumvent the wolf packs of submarines to make sure the aid would get to the United Kingdom, right? That's why this this deciphering that they did probably won the war for the Allies, right? Is one of those really interesting histories of World War II. Now, what's the point of this? Let me ask you something. If you are the Germans, you are the German high command, and for a long time, for many months, you have been sinking all these American ships that are crossing the Atlantic to help the United Kingdom. You keep sinking the convoys, you keep sinking them, and all of a sudden, you're not sinking as many of them. And then one day, you're not sinking any of them, right? What do you think is going to go through your mind, right? It's going to be like, well, something is going on, because why would the Americans, how do they know where we're waiting them, where our submarines are waiting to sink them? They're circumventing our positions, and they were not doing that before, right? So now you have a problem, because if you are the Allies and you have been trying to avoid all the German submarines, well, now you just gave your card away, and now the Germans know that you broke Enigma and that you're reading on their communications, and they're like, well, they probably are intercepting our messages and decoding our messages, and that's how they're being circumventing all the submarines, and that's why we're not sinking any more American ships. So now what are the Germans going to do? They're going to change their code, and now you're blind again, right? So once again, no strategy can remain effective indefinitely without adaptation. Just because you broke the Enigma code and now you can read their messages, you cannot just hope to, well, we're just going to keep reading the messages and then sending the intelligence to the ships forever. No, because you have an enemy that's going to adapt to you. So whatever strategy you find that works, you cannot rely on it indefinitely. You need to keep changing it and adapting it, because your opponent is going to adapt to it. Okay? Let me give you an example. In the stock market, I don't know, maybe some of you maybe invest in the stock market. What happens in the stock market if, let's say, you find a share that is going on let's say you find an investment strategy that gives you incredible returns, like returns way above, let's say the S&P 500, or like way above the average, right? Like you're getting crazy returns year after year after year. You're like, hey, this is great. I found a winning investment strategy. I'm just going to keep doing this for the rest of my life. What's going to happen to that investment strategy? What do you guys think is going to happen to that investment strategy if it's so good?
It will stop working at some point, and you will stop gaining
Of course, it's going to stop working, because if it's so good, then guess what? Everybody's going to start doing it. Yeah. And now the shares are going to become overly supplied. And then because there's a lot of supply, the price is going to drop. So once again, you were so successful with your investment that you ended up losing. That's the paradoxical logic of strategy. So you have to be careful with that, right? Let's say I gave this example. I don't know if this is a good example in you guys' field, but maybe it makes sense. Let's say AI, right? AI is all the buzz now, and everybody's using it for, let's say, copywriting and making marketing campaigns and business plans. Everybody's using AI for this. And usually, in many regards, AI can do a better job than we can as people, right? It has more information. It has this predictive LLM models. Like the AI does a phenomenal job at some of these things, much better job than we can do, right? So then in your mind, you could be like, this is great. My life is solved. I'm just going to keep using AI and these prompts that are working really well for me. I'm just going to keep using the same prompts forever, and my life is solved. Well, no. Once again, we come back to this problem. Just because the strategy is effective today does not mean it's going to keep being effective in the future, because the market in this case adapts to it, right? And if you don't adapt with it, you're going to end up reversing the success. So don't think of strategies as a goal of like, hey, I just need to find the winning strategy for my campaign or for my client or for my industry or for my business. There's not one winning strategy. There's a short-term strategy. Like in the short term, there's something that could help you win and work. It will work in the short term. But if you're really in a competitive environment, there is no strategy that's always going to work forever or indefinitely, right? And you need to keep that into your calculations. You need to take that into account in your calculations. So it's another one of those things that is very counterintuitive, but the better you understand it, the better you'll do, right? And then the last one that I want to share with you guys is this one. It's called the trap of effectiveness. It's another principle of strategy, and it's a simple one, but again, very confusing. It says, in the paradoxical reality of strategy, less is more. And that is also true. Less is more when you're doing strategy, right? Let me give you a historical example very quickly. This is, you guys might remember again from World War II when the Germans, when they were bombing London, they were bombing the UK. At the beginning, it was very effective. But then when the British developed radar, all of a sudden, they were able to intercept all the German planes. They knew exactly where they were coming from, when, how many, in which direction, and they began intercepting all the German bombers that were coming to bomb London. They became so good, the radar technology was so good at neutralizing the German bombing that then the Germans were like, hey, well, if we cannot bomb them by day anymore because the radar is basically screwing us up, we're going to start bombing them at night. And the night bombings in London were some of the most terrible and destructive ones of the whole war. Why did the Germans switch to night bombings? Because the British had become really good at intercepting them during the day using radar. So because the British did too much, they did too well in neutralizing that threat, then the Germans switched to an even more destructive approach, which was night bombings. And those were some of the most terrible bombings that London had to endure, right? So sometimes less is more. If the British had not been so devastating countering the planes using radar, then the Germans might have been like, well, you know what? We are losing more planes than usual, but it's not that bad. We're still doing some damage. We'll just keep doing the same thing. But because your countermeasure was so effective, you forced them to switch out to something that would turn out to be even worse for you, right? So if you had done less, that would have been more for you, right? How can that work in a competitive environment? This is the market share, right? This is usually, let's say this is an industry and this is the market share. There's 3 companies in a particular industry, and this is the market share of the companies. Again, if you guys are thinking in logic, in linear logic, you'll be like, hey, I want to be company 1. I want to have the most market share. But that's linear logic, right? There's a problem with being company 1 here. If you become company 1, what could be the risk of that? If you want more, if you want to take all the market share, well, guess what? You're not alone. This is not a 1-player game. In this example, it's a 3-player game. And who do you think is going to become the main target for these 2 companies? You. They're going to come after you because you took way too much of the market share, right? Let's say you had taken, instead of taking 67, what if you had taken, maybe 40? They have 30, and 40. You still have more than them, but not that much that they're willing to come and fight you over it, right? Or really willing to do anything about it. Because, yeah, you have a little bit more market share than they do, but not that much to trigger a response from them. But when you have 2, 3, 4 times their market share, now it's like, hey, this is too much. We need to do something about it. This is going to become a monopoly, right? Sometimes less is more. If you had, and sure, maybe you can keep this, but maybe not. That's where the competition is going to come in. But if you had settled for less market share in a strategic move or a strategic calculation, where it's like, I'm going to be better off staying with 40% than trying to push to 70% and potentially losing it because these 2 companies are going to come after me. Maybe that's a better strategic move than just thinking linearly that always more is better. Oh, let me get more market share. Why? Just because it's more, it's better. That's not always the case, right? And that's where strategic thinking comes into place. So this is a quote I would like to leave you guys with. It says, there's always planning involved in strategy, but there's not always strategy involved in planning. So when you guys are thinking about making plans for your business, your campaigns, your finances, your marketing, whatever, always ask yourself, is this a 1-player game or am I playing with multiple players? And if so, I need to take into account their moves. How are they going to respond or interact to whatever I do? And then you have to think several moves ahead. And if you keep these principles in mind, I think you can save yourself from some of these traps. And they're really, really nasty traps because many of them are very counterintuitive. But hopefully now you have a little bit of a better understanding of how those work. So yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This was a really insightful presentation, and I hope that you guys get a lot of really great insights and knowledge from it. I don't know if you have any questions, Alison, Deborah, that you want to ask, something that wasn't left clear.
No, thank you. You've given me a lot to think about and to take back to my team. And this was great. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Yeah, so thank you so much. It was very cool. I love history, so it was very cool to see how marketing and history can be linked. I really love the link that you make, so thank you so much.
Absolutely. Glad it was helpful. Hopefully that clears things up a little bit.
You did it! You made it to the end of the episode. Thanks for sticking around with me and listening all the way to the end. I really appreciate you as an audience member, and I hope that you found this helpful. If you did like this episode, it would mean so much to me if you subscribed, if you rate and review this podcast. It helps other people know that this podcast has something worth saying. It also would be super awesome if you could take a screenshot and share on Instagram and tag me at Ugly Ventures, UGLI Ventures, VENTURES. I am always so appreciative to hear from you, and I hope to see you back here next week